Art is a multifaceted pursuit. The purpose of art leaves a wide range of interpretation to it. Self-expression is probably the simplest intent affixed to creating art. I have this feeling that I need to expel into the world and only feel comfortable doing so by writing, drawing, singing, acting, filming, etc., etc. An important aspect of art creation, whether intentional or not, is that art can be used to pinpoint a place in time. We can get a sense of what was going on by looking at the art pieces produced during a certain period of time. The context behind the feelings being put into the certain pieces of artwork. Comics are no stranger to that. Since the inception of the sequential art form that is comic books, they have been used to express a multitude of ideas and feelings that were directly rooted by the time and place the creator was born and raised. The origin of the modern superhero is a direct reflection of what was needed in a hostile, warring world and era. Creators like Jack Kirby created super powerful beings in order to give us a little bit of hope. During the time when comic books were under attack by curmudgeons using children as shields to push their rhetoric, a period of hyper-censorship directly led to an era of counterculture comics, starting with publications like Mad magazine, created by Harvey Kurtzman and William Gaines. Mad was widely emanated and influential, affecting satirical media, as well as the cultural landscape of the late 20th century, with editor Al Fledstein increasing readership to more than 2 million readers during its 1973 to 1974 circulation peak. Mad influenced a whole generation of comic book creators, notable cartoonists like Art Spiegelman, Robert Crumb, and many more of their peers. Robert Crumb and Art Spiegelman led the way for the new wave of underground comics with their counterculture comic anthologies like Arcade, The Comics Revenue, Zapped Comics, and Raw. These three comic magazines were pivotal in the curation of the underground movements of the 1960s to the 1990s, featuring so many cartoonists with versatile art styles and storytelling techniques. These magazines brought an artistic uptick in a fleeting underground scene that was being stereotyped as cheap thrill comics, only good for displays of the absurd, sex, and drugs, when in reality, underground comics were way bigger and way more diverse than that. In the 1980s, there was a second underground wave, most notably known as the black and white indie boom. Comics like Cerebus, Flaming Carrot, The Tick, Bone, and most notably Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. One of the most important aspects of the 1980s boom, outside of the great contemporary comics, was the vocal advocacy of creator independence and creator rights. Dave Sims, the creator of Cerebus, wrote a book about how to self-publish your own comics the way he did with his Cerebus series. Indie creators were trying to collate and create things like the Creator Bills of Rights. In Scott McCloud's blog, he wrote, "The Creator Bill of Rights was written in November 1988 for the two-day summit of comic book artists held in Northampton, Massachusetts. The meeting had been suggested by Cerebus creator Dave Sims and hosted by local heroes Kevin Eastman and Peter Laird, creators of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. The summit was a follow-up to a July meeting in Toronto, which produced the Creative Manifesto. Some of us found the manifesto a bit scattered, so I wrote a rough draft of a proposed replacement. That replacement, a Bill of Rights for comic creators, was accepted quickly as Sims' suggestion. The rest of the day was nonstop argument about the document's wording. He continued with, "The bill never generated much noise in the comic industry, and I wouldn't want to exaggerate its influence, but it produced an interesting snapshot of our attitudes at the time and the climate that was fueling self-publishers, progressive business people, and artistic tryings to reinvent the comic industry." Neil Adams was a big vocal leader for creator rights, being a strong vocal leader for artists to get the rights to their own original artwork back from the comic companies to be able to sell said artwork for supplementary income, something that wasn't allowed prior. Neil Adams also at one point tried to unionize comic book artists, but many of his attempts fell through, just as it did in years past with other creators before him. Though Adams' efforts helped change a few things on how creators got paid. DC initiated a new royalty program in 1981, the work of publisher Jeanette Kahn, who cited Neil Adams' influences on her decision, which pushed Marvel into doing the same a few months later. All the hard work of these creators of the past advocating for comic artist rights, I believe, illuminated and peaked with the formation of the iconic, supposedly indie comic book company Image Comics. We all know the story of Image Comics, right? I've covered it a few times on this channel. Real quick, TLDR, some of the most popular artists from Marvel, literally the top selling artists at the time, defected from the company and created Image Comics, echoing the sentiment sentiments of comic creators of the past, using the same talking points as some of their underground peers. Image Comics' main focus was better pay and IP ownership for creators. These creators were able to capitalize on their hype and popularity that grew over at Marvel and brought all their fans over to buying their own original, completely creator-owned comics, while also getting lucky that the comic industry was in the midst of a speculator boom. New #1 comics were selling like hotcakes, and those Image comic boys were pushing them out. A few decades later, Image Comics has cemented itself as the third most popular comic book publisher behind Marvel and DC Comics, still keeping its same mission at hand of allowing creators who publish through them to keep ownership of their IPs. Although since the inception of Image Comics, the industry has changed, and I'd argue not for the better, but actually for the worse, specifically for the identity of indie underground comic scene. See, Image Comics and its founding fathers ran on this idea of creator independence, though many of the artists and Image itself wasn't a indie company. In its first year, the original Image books were published through Malibu Comics. Todd McFarlane, Rob Liefeld, Jim Lee, and others weren't printing and mailing comics off themselves like many of the actual indie comics creators were doing at the time. Someone like Jeff Smith comes to mind, who was mailing and distributing his own Bones comics with his wife when he first started Cartoon Books. McFarlane, Liefeld, Lee, and others were actually pretty damn wealthy by the time they split from Marvel, benefiting from the change in royalty system I had mentioned before that pays very well when you're selling tons of X-Men, Spider-Man, and X-Force comics. So it wasn't much of a risk for them to break off and start their own things. Essentially, I say all that to say Image Comics is a fake indie comic publisher that benefited from the work of hurting and starving comic artists. Image seemed to co-opt the identity of indie comic creators while not actually being indie itself. The only people who positively gained from the Image Comics breakoff were the original founders and really nobody else, actually leaving the industry worse off than it was before. Think about it. Do you ever wonder why there's no more comic book artist superstars like Rob, Todd, and Jim? Why companies will push writers over artists? Everyone remembers Robert Kirkman's The Walking Dead, Grant Morris's Animal Man, Neil Adams' Sandman, but you'd very seldom see the artists of these series being promoted as much as the writers. Collected editions of these comic series with the writer's name slapped on the cover with big, bold, blocky text, while the artist's name is hidden within the pages of the book. I've talked about this phenomenon before in an older video, go check that out, but in general, what the Image guys did was leave a bad taste in the mouths of Marvel and DC, who quickly vowed to never allow the artist to become bigger than the program, slowly prompting up writers and minimalizing the artist's name. It also didn't help that all the comics that came out of the first run of Image were damn near unreadable, giving the perception that good artists were shitty writers, when in fact that wasn't true. Only the Image guys were ass at writing, mainly because these dudes were too worried about cashing in on their new #1 comics and not actually creating one good series, ripping off many of the team comics that they were working on while they were at Marvel or DC before they defected. Outside of McFarlane and Eric Larson, who made their own original idea IPs with Spawn and Savage Dragon, Spawn being a waste of potential of a comic book series, check out my video about that, while Savage Dragon is something else at this point. Eric Larson's got Steamboat Willie and Savage Dragon doing some wild shit as of late. If you know, you know. All of these initial flaws from Image Comics hurt the perception of the comic book artist as a whole in the mainstream. Image had a real chance to change the game and create real impact, but they really didn't. I said it before, the idea of creator ownership and creators' rights wasn't something new. They just used that as a veil to cover up the fact that the original Image founding fathers were just trying to milk their teenage fan bases at the time, who are now the same grown-ups online claiming that the Image comics were peak indie comics and trying to hold those metrics of sales from Wildcats, Youngblood, and Spawn as the rule and not the exception, ruining the reality of what it looks like to be a real indie artist. Not only that, once things started getting a bit rocky, two of the biggest and notable names from Image founding fathers ran back to Marvel, and Jim Lee and Rob Liefeld, to work on the mid-ass Heroes Reborn series, essentially giving back the power to Marvel, proving that it wasn't truly about creator independence for those artists, it was about a bag that no one else was able to get outside of Jim Lee or Rob Liefeld. The outliers, not the norms. The commodification of the indie aesthetic isn't new. This tends to happen once a low-key underground fringe artistic movement starts to become a bit popular. In my lifetime, one of the biggest co-ops of indie art was with the SoundCloud music scene. I was in high school during the peak of SoundCloud. The rap music I found on that app was something so much more different than anything I was hearing from the mainstream at the time. And it was created by regular people who had a mic in a closet it and a cracked version of FL Studios on a laptop, which made me even more compelled to listen to them. Artists like Young Lean, Bones, Denzel Curry, Xavier Wolf, XXXTentacion, Father, I Love McConan, Puya, Rob Banks, and many artists came from that wave with their own unique sound and look. These artists circumvented the mainstream music industry, were doing everything DIY, recording themselves, making their own music videos, managing their own tours, merch, and so much more. I remember being all in on SoundCloud artists. At one point, that was all I listened to. I was on some fuck the mainstream type vibes. All the organic indie creatorship was lost once one rapper appeared on the scene, and that was Lil Yachty. Once Lil Yachty came on the scene with his bright red braids and beads in them, that was the day, in my opinion, SoundCloud started to die. Not because Lil Yachty made bad music or anything. It was just Yachty was already signed to a major label while still putting music out on SoundCloud. Yachty's explosion in popularity brought eyes to SoundCloud artists, whether good or bad, it didn't matter. These record label execs started poaching artists left and right. These execs did this secretly though, wanting to slowly introduce their signed artists as an indie underground SoundCloud artist because that was what was cool at the time, even though it was all a big lie. After Yachty bursted the SoundCloud bubble, many of the artists coming out stopped being original and started trying to copy the trend. They didn't care about the art of rap or music, they just wanted to become popular and seeing posting music on SoundCloud as a quick way in. These execs thought the same as well. Given the DIY aesthetic was low cost and low risk. Billie Eilish is the biggest example of this, using the fake indie aesthetic when she first appeared, making it seem as if she was some random girl who was making music in a room with her producer brother, even though her brother was already a signed artist and so was she before she actually posted music anywhere. This is what people call an industry plan. Billie Eilish is not the first nor the last of this artist. There's nothing wrong with being an artist with money or having financial help with your artistic ventures, but it does become a problem when you front like all your success just came from your own self-determination and grinding hard, that your popularity was all do-it-yourself and independent, when in fact it wasn't. It sets a horrible precedent, skewing the view of what indie success really looks like, not what these corporations present it to be compared to what it actually looks like. Kind of like when one of those hustle bros tries to tell you to work hard and out hustle everybody, well then you can become a millionaire like them, even though many of those guys came from a place of privilege or a wealthy family or are a trust fund baby. Now let's look at Modern Image, this so-called indie comics hub. At this point in time, to me, Image Comics is just a label you stick on your comics. They are like A24 or Blumhouse, publishing comics by already established comic book pros whose projects didn't get picked up by Marvel or they didn't want to give to Marvel. Never breaking any artists and only promoting creators, mainly writers who are already their best sellers. Robert Kirkman, Rick Remender, Brian K. Vaughan, these guys alone have kept Image afloat with their comics they've written in the past decades. If it's not these writers who get the hype machine, it's legacy creators who get some hype whenever they decide to pull a new gimmick out their ass, like doing all Spawn covers on select Image titles or republishing Rob Liefeld's Youngblood comic, which Image has put a ton of their marketing dollars behind, trying to make everybody forget how ass that comic really is. Even getting some notable creators to hype up the release of this Rob Liefeld comic. Rob Liefeld, the guy who goes on wildly ridiculous rants on his podcast, who couldn't wait to take the sole credit for Deadpool once the movie came out and turned the character from a D-list character to an A-list character. Even though all the aspects of Deadpool people like, he really didn't contribute to. Rob Liefeld, who scammed hella people off a Kickstarter, $35K to be exact, off of false promises of a Brigade reboot. Then he went to Indiegogo and scammed more of his fans for more money. Then, if you mention it to him on social media, guess what? You're blocked. Rob Liefeld, the guy who hates Marvel Studios, especially Kevin Feige, for not inviting him to the Deadpool Wolverine film after party. One thing for certain, two things for sure, nostalgia is a hell of a drug and Rob Liefeld is selling it by the pound. Jim Lee and Todd McFarlane are selling nostalgia as well. McFarlane is still whoring out Spawn, while Jim Lee works for DC Comics doing whatever, I guess. I mean, Lee recently spoke out against the use of AI, but it's kind of a moot point. Lee also cashed in on his original IPs by just selling them back to DC. So again, it's about the bag, not creator independence. Outside of those types of creators, good luck getting any help promoting your comic from Image. There's no reason Kaya shouldn't be a bestseller comic. Kaya is a comic written and drawn by Wes Craig, an artist best known for working on Deadly Class with writer Rick Remender. Kaya is an ongoing fantasy adventure comic. The main character Kaya has a magical arm and hunter-like skills, who is tasked with delivering her brother Jin to a safe haven after the village is destroyed. Jin is foretold by the elders of their village to be the golden child who is going to save humanity humanity from the Artarian Empire and their deadly robot army. The storytelling and artwork in this comic is beautiful. The storytelling is seamless. I binge read this comic in a week. I was so enamored by Wes Craig's artwork and the visual storytelling. In my opinion, this comic should be at the top of everyone's pull list. A true all ages comic that isn't immature or goofy, but not too serious or gory. It falls in the same vein of an Adventure Time or Avatar: The Last Airbender. Sadly, this comic is not talked about enough at all. It's shitty that many indie artists seem to get the idea that publishing a comic through Image Comics is the golden ticket, but it's not. It's not what it used to be, or better yet, it never actually was that. The best thing Image did was inspire the Gen X generation of creators to make comics, but they didn't lead them to the water. They just gave them a sip of it. Even now, Image has pocket imprints under them that seem to defeat the whole purpose of what Image Comics ethos was about. Imprints like Skybound will help creators produce their comics, but will retain IP rights to said comic. Like, what the fuck? And it's crazy because there are so many of these imprints popping up from writers, the only people in the industry who have the autonomy to do this. Image at one point was supposed to be leading the new wave of fresh and new ideas with exciting new artists and characters, but there's no identity to this company anymore. Just a hub for pros to get their side projects done. It doesn't have to be this way though. If you actually study the real indie artists that were successful without losing their artistic integrity, they've given us the blueprint to success. People for some reason only look at the top of the mountain without actually taking in the full context of how these people got there in the first place. Circling back to Dave Sims, who gave you the blueprint on how to run an indie comics publisher, doing this in the 1980s and the 1990s with the technology he had. Sims even bypassed the distribution chokehold Diamond had by distributing his comics through a whole nother system, a move Diamond did not like at all. Dave Sims, though, is a very questionable and weird person who has done some questionable and weird shit later on in his life, but that's another discussion for another day. Art Spiegelman and his wife Francis Molly produced their Raw magazine at home using innovative and unique techniques and unique ways of printing a comic magazine. This is where Spiegelman's mouse first appeared as mini inserts in the magazine. Nowadays, you don't have to do any of this. All you need is access to the internet. A place filled with toxicity, also a place of opportunity for artists to thrive. So many ways to get your eyes on your comics, to sell your comics, and to build an audience. Have a direct line to your people. Funny enough, Liefeld loves the direct-to-consumer model, utilizing sites like Whatnot to live stream and sell his comics straight to his fans, though he seems to have forgotten about his Kickstarter or doesn't even utter the word Kickstarter unless it's to promote a movie about Stan Lee's assistant trying to cash in on his trauma porn film using footage he has of Stan Lee's last days of being abused. Yeah. Anyways, the roads are there for us artists. We may not get a union going, as most people either don't understand what a union's actual purpose is for, or think it's some communist socialist shit, even though most millionaires and billionaires function as socialists. A prime example of this is a salary cap for sports teams or big corporate buyouts from the government. We can still, as artists, come together and spread the knowledge and pay it forward. Tell people who are the best and affordable printers, cross-promote each other's projects. If you have the funds, support each other's projects financially. The underground isn't dead. We just need to reframe how we look at what underground is and what actual independence looks like, what success in this space looks like realistically. Stop evangelizing these creators of past when many of them stood by or advocated for a cause they didn't actually believe in, just to fall back into the system that they were once against. We don't have to rely on a system that isn't here to work for us. We need to buck the system and create our own paths, our own artwork in the way we seem most comfortable with. To look back on art, we're supposed to have an understanding of the time frame it came from. When I look at 90s Image, I don't only see high energy artwork, crazy costume designs, but I also see false promises, failures of the creators, and a generation of fans who can't get past their nostalgia to see what that era really was. That's why I'm done with the 90s. This video was pretty much inspired by the commentary around Image and putting myself back into following all of the publications, artists, and creators. It was just really weird how people kind of talked about Image and how people put up, especially the 90s guys, up on this high pedestal when, I mean, their influence is noticed, obviously, what their impact has been set and dealt on the community as a whole. But I just felt like it was unnecessary at times, and it seemed like it was put as a place where independent artists need to go in order to be successful, when I don't think that's the case at all for Image. I mean, a lot of people have said this before, the Image essentially is just a hub for creators to make their side projects. It's not what it used to be. A lot of the creators and indie creators that I followed when I first got into this space talked about how once they got their Image books, or once they got their books published through Image, it would be all grand and, dandy. And obviously that is not the case. Once I started hanging out with real grassroots independent underground artists, I started to see what the landscape really looked like and what really you can make out of it. And that's kind of the place where I'm at and where I kind of am going to stay, at least for now. That's the whole point of me building this audience on YouTube and, all of that. So, I'm just one person. As these are all just my opinions. Do what you want with your own comics. Create your comics however you seem fit. Go, if you want to be published through Image and that's just your dream to get published through Image, then go and do that. It's not like an evil corporation or anything in that nature. People give it this weird like indie underground look or aesthetic when it's really not. It's another mainstream publication. It just doesn't have the mainstream IPs as a Marvel or DC. But go ahead and do what you want to do. I'm not like beholden or against getting published through any major publisher. I mean, I would want to get published through a major publisher at one point. I don't know if it would be a comic book publisher. It might be more of like, I'm more leaning to like a Pantheon or Abram Books or something like that. But that's just me and the path that I'm kind of figuring out what I want to do in the long run. Or, if you guys like, comment, subscribe, I won't have to go to a publication and you guys support the books, then I can just keep publishing books through my own self means. There's so many other paths and ways you can get your books produced nowadays. And I just want to encourage people to look into those paths and not just try to go through this one singular route that you have been subscribed to go down, I don't know. But I appreciate you guys for watching this video to the end. Like, comment, subscribe. Check out my Patreon. Subscribe to my Patreon. It's only $5 a month. You get access to everything on the Patreon. Even if you subscribe as a free member, you'll get access to a lot of content on there. I'm also a comic book creator. I have a bunch of comics on my website out right now. AWOL issue number 1 and issue number 2 are available on my website. Also, all my other bibliography is available on my website as well. I also have some free downloads. Sign up for my newsletter. Go check out my second channel, Kova's Lookout Live, where I do weekly live streams with up-and-coming independent artists to give eyes to them, as well as promote their books and what they got coming on. I also do sketchbook tours on that channel. I do reviews, and I give out comic book recommendations. So if you're interested, go check out that second channel as well. Again, thank you for watching this video to the end. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. And yeah, I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.